Hi everybody! After 2 years, we are finally back to doing videos at Impress Bakeware. Today we're going to be doing a Halloween video, and I'm going to be featuring a cream cheese spritz, yum, which is one of my favorites. And we're going to be focusing on the ghosts, the jack-o'-lanterns, and using the gingerbread houses from the gingerbread set to make haunted houses. In the past, I have colored the dough, I have used multiple colors of dough, I've used icing to color the cookies and decorate them. I've put sprinkles on them. I've even made some decadent stuffed sandwich cookies. But this time, we're going to be using pearlescent dust to paint on the cookies. A couple of years ago, when there was that big fad with adult coloring books, I didn't really get into that. And now I'm kind of sorry that I didn't, because this is actually really fun. Instead of having just something blank in front of me, like a blank piece of paper or a blank cutout cookie, a spritz cookie has lines and ridges and bumps and areas that I can use just like a paint by number or an adult coloring book. So this is really zen and it's really fun, and we're just going to have a blast doing this. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you how the rest of the Halloween set presses, just so that if you haven't seen it before you can see it. And I'm going to show you how you can also use the gingerbread boy from the gingerbread set to make mummies, or also we can use our snowflakes to make spider webs. Sorry about the doorbell, I'm shooting from home. Let's get to it. I do sound like a broken record every time I do this, because what I'm going to tell you now is that you have to cream your butter to make really good spritz cookies. So this time we're going to be creaming together butter and cream cheese. When you're creaming butter, you want to set your mixer on the highest setting that you can. Something like whip, something like you're trying to make buttercream frosting. So you really want to get it so that your butter's going to go from that bright yellow it comes out of the box with to something that's a little bit lighter. And it's not going to fluff as much as it normally would because of the cream cheese in it, but you want to make sure that it's creamy and smooth and consistent. Let's do it. Okay, this is looking pretty fluffed up. You can probably see it here in the close-up camera, that I get little peaks in this. It's not going to be quite as fluffy as it would if it was just butter, but that's what you're going for, is something that's nicely combined all together. The next thing we're going to do is add the sugar, because the real basis of a spritz cookie is the creaming of the butter and the sugar together. It's not just creaming the butter. So in this recipe, there's just one kind of sugar, and I'm just going to pour it all in at once and cream the whole thing again. In we go. Okay, that looks good. It's not much different than without the sugar, but you get the hint. It's just fluffed up butter and sugar. The next thing we're going to do is add our we just did that. We're going to add our wet ingredients, which in this case is just a teaspoon of vanilla and 1 egg. The recipe is in the comments if you're on YouTube, or it's in the written blog post that goes with this video. Alright, as you can see, this is nicely fluffed up. The last step that we have in making this really easy dough is just to add the flour, which already has the baking powder and the salt already whisked into it. Don't add too much at once or you're going to end up with a ton of flour in your face, and nobody really wants that because that just leads to choking and coughing. Leave a little bit out. Okay, looks like a pretty good spritz dough. I'm going to do this live. I haven't looked at this dough yet. I'm going to pull it out with my hands and see if I've got the right consistency. You can always tweak a spritz dough by, if it's too dry, you can add a little bit of vanilla, because who doesn't like extra vanilla? And if it's a little too mushy, you can add a little bit of flour. I always start with a teaspoon of vanilla at a time, or a tablespoon of flour at a time. Let's go ahead and take a look at this dough. Spritz dough should break, and this looks perfect. It should break in your hands because that's the way the cookies are going to press. It's going to get extruded from the press, and then it needs to pull up and break the shapes off nicely. So this actually looks terrific. It should be soft and malleable and have this beautiful breaking quality to it. I'm going to go ahead and clean up here, and then we'll get to pressing. Since we're doing the jack-o'-lanterns, it's just easier to color that dough instead of having to paint that entire surface, because the only thing that's going to be painted on those is their black little hollowed out eyes. So what I'm going to do is I took out 1/3 of my dough, and I'm just going to add some gel. This is a gel food coloring. You don't want to use liquid because it's going to thin out your dough, just like adding any kind of liquid would. So I'm just going to take some toothpicks here and just pull out a glob of orange. And then toss that away to Mr. Bear. He's always my handy-dandy helper. And that might be enough, but I want to make sure they're nice and orange. So I'm going to add a little bit more. It's always best to start with less because you can always add more, but you can't take it out. So let's see how this turned out. Okay, this looks like a nice pumpkin-y orange. I'm happy with it. Show it to you in the close-up camera here. Nice and pumpkin-y, and it still has that breaking ability, so it should press really nicely. Let's start with the jack-o'-lanterns. So I'm going to take this dough and pack it into my press with the back of a spoon. Two things before I get to packing the dough into the press barrel. This is kind of exciting for me because this is the first video that I'm doing with our actual cookie press. This is the Impress cookie press. It is a very classic cookie press design, but we searched high and low for just the right manufacturer to make sure that everything was really smooth and that everything worked really well. So I'm really happy to be using it for the first time in a video. I also went ahead and covered up my plain dough because I don't want it to dry out while I'm working on the jack-o'-lanterns. And I put my orange dough in a little bowl to get rid of the big one. All right, let's pack it in here. A lot of people like to roll their dough into a log and stuff it in, and I find that that can sometimes leave air pockets. So what I like to do, sorry for the noise, what I like to do is do that in little pieces and pack it in like this. You want to stuff it in with the back of a spoon because that's going to pack it so that all the air bubbles get out, because the air bubbles are what's going to make your cookies press in strange shapes with missing parts and stuff like that, or they're too big or too small because the pressure has to be even in there. So I'm going to pack this up. Alright, last little bit of dough getting stuffed in there. Kind of wipe it clean on the end. Alright, and we're ready to go. With my dough packed into the barrel and the air bubbles squished out, I'm just going to take my jack-o'-lantern disc and plop it into the bottom ring and screw it on. And there isn't a right or wrong way for really any of our discs. You can press them in either direction. I like to set the pressure by kind of pressing down on the plunger a little bit and then pulling it around to line up the teeth that pull it down from the lever. The first few cookies, when you're pressing cookies, often come out junky. They come out strangely shaped, too big, too small, and all sorts of weird, and that's okay. That's because it's setting pressure in the barrel and getting the dough to extrude properly. So let's go ahead and see what happens. They may be junk, they may be just fine. Let's see. Didn't stick the first time. That one looks just like a jack-o'-lantern. That one I had trouble with. Back in the bowl. I'm going to move over to a clean spot because the dough has to be able to stick to the pan. One of the tricks you can use is to put your pan, if it's a hot day like it kind of is here today, you can put it in the freezer for a few minutes and then your dough is going to stick a lot better. But let's see if I can get this to keep going. It's having a little trouble sticking, but they're coming out fine once I get there. That's better. See, it just takes a couple of cookies to come out and get the dough to be pressing evenly. There you go. And it's all right with any kind of one click per cookie press to use more than one click or less than a click. It doesn't really matter. This is just a dough pump. It's just extruding the dough onto the sheet, and your only goal is to get a nice shape. That one's a little too big, so maybe it'll go back, we'll see. But if it takes a half a click, a full click, it doesn't really matter. I made that one too fat because I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. It's been 2 years, guys. Cut me some slack here. But the rest of them, for the most part, are coming out really nicely. I'm sure you can see that in the close-up camera. So I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing so that you can see, once you get a rhythm, just how quickly they go. So I've got a few here that are a little bit too big. Spritz cookies, you want them to be nice and petite so that they hold their shape well when they bake and so that they come out in the first place with a nice shape. let's see, this one's a little bit fat too. So I'm going to, now that I'm empty, I'm going to reload my press and finish out the sheet with the jack-o'-lanterns, and then I'll show them to you in the close-up camera when they're done. All right, I have reloaded my press barrel. The other thing I like to do is extrude a little bit of dough before I start pressing, because that way you can tell if your pressure is already set. If you don't press a few out, like even into the air and kind of wipe them away, you're not going to know. I've had people say, nothing came out, nothing came out. Well, you've got to actually get the dough compressed down in there before something starts coming out. So it's good if you can get it to the point where there's just a little dough coming out, or even squish one all the way out and just wipe it away. So with my pressure set, let's see what happens. These all look like jack-o'-lanterns to me. Yep, going nice and smoothly. Should be able to finish this sheet off right away. See what happens when I'm actually paying attention to what I'm doing? Much better result when you actually pay attention to what you're doing. Write that down, kiddies. All right. Nice looking bunch of jack-o'-lanterns here. Got some big ones, some little ones, and I'm completely out of dough. Okay. We're going to throw these in the oven at 400 degrees. If you want to, you can sprinkle a little just plain table sugar on them. It'll just sort of disappear. But this is a pretty sweet recipe, so you probably don't have to. Let's get these baked up, and then I'll show you how to decorate them. First things first, I promised a close-up in the camera. I am definitely 2 years rusty at this. All right, so check it out. Some of these are kind of big, some of them are just the right size. Press them however you want them, just as long as they're not so big that they lose their shape. Anything that looks like a nice jack-o'-lantern is going to be just fine. Now we'll get them in the oven. With our jack-o'-lanterns in the oven baking, I'm going to show you how to press the other two discs. Let's get pressing and see what happens. The ghosts are a nice tiny little shape. He lost his head. He's really spooky. He lost his head. I was saying the ghosts are a nice tiny little shape, and you don't want to make them too fat or they're going to lose their definition, but this is one you can really experiment with. You can kind of make them different shapes. It's small, so you have to kind of push a little bit harder to get the dough to extrude because there's not as much coming out. But they tend to press really perfectly, like these are. I'm not having any problems at all. So make some fat ones, make some skinny ones, make them however you want to make them. They're going to be just as cute either way, as long as they're not complete and total blobs. Yeah, see how easily? And most of these, I'm not even using a full click. You can feel the dough sticking to the pan. Once you get good at cookie pressing, you can feel it stick, you can feel it kind of pushing back, and it just becomes really natural. Remember, this is a dough pump. It doesn't have to be one click. All right, I'm going to swap out the discs here since I still have some dough left. And let's just show pressing the houses. Oops, he's got to go over here. Mr. Bear, hold the ghost. And it doesn't matter which way you put the house in. See how nice and smooth that goes on? I like that. There's a few out there that, man, that's a clunky experience. All right, so my pressure should still be set really well. Let's see what happens. Sometimes the roof will pull away like that a little bit. Can you see what happened? Maybe not in the close-up camera. If a shape kind of, this one came apart completely, so we're going to toss it back in the bowl. But if a shape comes apart just a little bit, you can often use your fingers, that's perfect, to just piece it back together, and that's not a big deal at all. See, the rest are coming out just fine. These you don't want to make too big. You want to make sure that they are holding their shape and not turning into blob houses. I think that's my last one. I'm out of dough. Yeah. So I'm going to show you in the close-up camera what happened here. I would say that this one is a little too big for me, so I'm probably going to pull that one off the pan, but everything else looks pretty good. Here's the ghosts. There's some skinny ones and some fat ones, and we're going to make them all shimmery and pretty and turn them into little Casper the Ghosts. The jack-o'-lanterns are done baking and they're cooling off. You don't want to let Spritz cookies sit too long on the pan, or you might have trouble with them breaking as you're taking them off. But you also don't want to take them off right away, because then they're going to be too mushy to hold their shape. So just use a nice clean spatula and try to get under them flat and quickly, And they always come off really easily for me. I know I've had a few people complain about breakage, but just really try to do it carefully. Don't bring your spatula in at this angle and then kind of let it tip up. Bring it in nice and flat and they should come off just fine. I usually let them sit anywhere from 4 to 8 minutes. If you let them sit for a half an hour, they might stick, so get them off of there right away. And the other thing is, with the ghosts in the oven, you want to make sure when you're leaving your cookies white that you don't let them brown too much, because they're not going to look right. So just watch them, because Spritz cookies, once they start to brown, they go really quickly. So make sure that you're checking them early and check them often. All right, with that said, we're going to get on to decorating the ghosts. And the easiest thing about this is that we're just going to dry brush these. You can paint them, which is the next technique I'll show you. But for these guys, I found that just taking a big brush like this, you can see in the close-up camera, it's a pretty big flat brush, and just brushing on this ghost, just back and forth and back and forth, just until it has a nice shimmery sheen over it. They're already white, so you don't really need to paint them white because they're already white. So I'm just trying to give it a shimmer so that it looks a little bit different than the way it came out of the oven. And it turned out to me to be just enough to make it nice and festive. So I'm going to show you. I had one that one's just kind of straight out of the oven. Made these the other day, and this one has its little shimmer there. See the difference? And that's really all there is to it. To finish off the ghosts is really, really simple. You can either use a tight little brush with a tiny little tip to put pearl dust into the eyes, which is easy because there are little holes. And I would suggest doing it wet, which I'll show you that technique in a minute. Or you can just keep it simple. I've just got some store-bought icing here, and just put 2 little dots right into the holes. So check it out. I'm gonna make him spooky purple like the haunted house. Give him one little purple eye and a second little purple eye. And then I'm going to dip my finger in water. I have a little bowl of water here, and keep it just barely wet. And then just look down and I'm just gonna tap really easily to get those little peaks off. Because when you make those little dots, they end up peeking and they look kind of silly. So you just want to tap them down and you use the water so that they don't stick to your fingers. So now I have a shimmery ghost with spooky purple eyes. That's all there is to making the ghosts. Okay, with the ghosts and haunted houses out of the oven, I can get on to decorating. I have these cookies already made ahead of time. So I'm going to show you the wet painting technique. I'm going to start with the black color because that goes on both of these cookies, the jack-o'-lantern and the haunted house. Now the technique that I use is I've got a little dish here that's filled with, it's just a generic imitation clear vanilla. Now I'm going to take one of my big fat brushes, and I've also got a little pile right here of some black pearlescent dust. So just this is the technique that I do to make kind of a palette of painting colors here. I just take this brush and I dip it in here, and then I drip it onto the plate, not touching the dust and not touching the cookie. I just want to get some liquid on here, and then I'm going to mix them. And I wanted you to see me do this from beginning to end so that you could really see in real time how it happens. All right, look to the close-up camera here. See how it just comes together like a paint? Isn't that neat? Yeah. So it just comes together like that. And you just want to make it nice and smooth so there aren't any weird little lumps in there. And then you're just going to start painting. I'm going to start on the roof of the house first and show you how easily this just goes on. And you can make it thinner or thicker, however you want it to look. I'm just going to kind of go for it here. This is pretty thick, to be honest. You could do it thinner. You can also find that sometimes your colors are going to look a little bit translucent, so just put some white in with it. And if you do that, then it's going to be not as sheer, not as see-through. You want it to be kind of opaque so you're not really looking at the cookie underneath it. And once this dries, you're not going to taste this at all. So if you use lemon extract or you use vodka, whatever it is that you use, the alcohol is going to evaporate and the flavor is pretty much going to evaporate too. I like the clear vanilla because it really doesn't taste like anything at all. Sometimes I can taste lemon a little bit when I use it, but for the most part, that's how it's done. So there's the roof of the haunted house cookie. Check it out. There you go. Now it's black. And once that dries, you want to make sure that you let them sit and dry in between colors or they're all going to bleed together just like a regular kind of paint would. So let me set the house aside And let's look at this. Now see, this is already, because alcohol evaporates so quickly, this is already starting to dry out on the plate. So I'm going to add a little bit, another just drop of water there, and let it kind of sink in. Just keep it all over there ready. There we go. Get it nice and wet again. See how that's going? Okay. I feel like Bob Ross. Happy little cookies. Happy cookies. This is way too much fun. All right. Now I'm going to get into this jack-o'-lantern here. This one's a little fat, but I figured that would work well so that you can really see the details. Okay. I'm using a nice fine tip here, and I'm just going to start drawing in these little triangle eyes. And you can watch me do it in real time. Nothing to this. Not a big deal. But it's fun. I was doing it with my kids the other day, even though they are both adults, both in college. And then do the little nose. Spooky already. And then the mouth, just make sure you're nice and precise down here. So there's not quite as much wiggle room. Let's get in there. I'm really hating having eyes over 40 right now because it's harder to see these things without my glasses. And I didn't think to pick them up. Get down in between his little scary teeth here. Around the second tooth. Finish off the mouth, and guess what? Now you've got a jack-o'-lantern. Check him out. He went from just a plain old little pumpkin-y, where's the camera? Plain old little pumpkin-y guy to having a nice spooky face. And the only other thing I would do to him, let's take one more color here. Why is everything a him? We'll make that a her. Okay, so that's a... I bet that tapping was great. So I put a little green dust on the plate, and now I'm going to add a little water right next to it. And then I'm going to turn it into a paint. Swirl it all around. And again, you can add a little white if you find that it's just too translucent. And then I'm just going to add a little stem to my spooky jack-o'-lantern. There you go. I really feel like Bob Ross. Happy jack-o'-lanterns, happy jack-o'-lanterns. There's one other part of the way I did the haunted houses that needs a little black. So I'm going to go ahead and outline the windows. And again, just try and keep a precise little stroke. Happy houses, happy windows. Just paint little squares around them, and then we're going to fill the squares with yellow so that they look all spooky. Like the windows have some candles in them or something. I'm also going to do the door, well actually I'll do the door black. Let's do the door in black. Just fill it on in. We'll let this dry for a minute, and then I'm going to do the house in purple. I made another pile of dust over here, and this one is purple. Now that my house is dry, for the most part, I can go ahead and do the house purple. Add some liquid, turn it into a paint. Now this one the purple is a little funky, just like lots of purples are, because they're a mixture of blue and pink, and sometimes you can kind of see that. And because this is so dark, it would kind of blend in a little too much with the black. So I like to add, you can see what I'm doing. I've got a pile of purple paint there, and I added about the same amount of white on top of it. Oops, 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 oops. I'm going to add, I'll get a clean brush. I'm going to add a little more water to that because there's more dry stuff to add to it. And you can see this purple is going to get lighter and more opaque. See, now it's going to be a pastel lavender. So it'll be brighter to contrast with the black roof. There we go. Isn't that pretty? I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so the same thing. You're just going to paint it right on here. And the next thing you know, you've got a purple haunted house. Across the top of the windows. All right. The last thing I'll do to this one is just put a little bit of green. Get that edge there. Put a little green in the center and finish off the windows. I added some more water to my green paint because it was starting to dry out from doing the stem on the jack-o'-lantern. Now I've got a good paint again, and I'm just going to fill in the top of the house here so that it's a bunch of different colors. For my last color, it's going to be yellow to make the windows spooky. So I put some yellow dust on with a little bit of water, and I added some white to it because yellow is pretty light, obviously, and you want it to stay opaque so that the yellow shows over the kind of yellow whiteness of the cookie itself. So here goes. I'm just going to fill in these windows. This all looks a lot smoother once it dries. When it's wet, you might think this is a little bit sloppy looking, but I promise you, once it dries, it's going to look really slick. It looks really cool. I'm so happy with this technique. I have one of my customers to thank for that, and you know exactly who you are. All right, take a look at this. I'm afraid to pick it up because some of it's wet, but here you go. Here's a haunted house with its black roof and its spooky yellow windows. Nice little monster house. And then you can take all sorts of little Halloween sprinkles that have ghosts and bats and things and just use a little bit of icing to attach them onto the house and make them all spooky looking. So honestly, that is all I have for today. How easy was that? Pretty simple. In the pictures at the end here, I'm going to show you the gingerbread boy as the mummy and the snowflakes, get your words right, the snowflakes as spiderwebs. And those are also showcased in my Chocolate Halloween blog, which doesn't have a video, but it is on the Creative Cookie Press blog. All of our discs are available on Amazon, and they're available on our website, Impress Bakeware. So with finishing this up, I'm going to wish you all happy baking and ask you to press the possibilities. Thanks for being here today.